Hey, pet owners, and welcome to the Small Dogs, Small Bytes podcast. I affectionately call it the Pupcast, and we're going to be starting our initial podcast today because I cannot stall any longer with the quarantine going on. So today I want to just give an introduction to what the podcast is going to be, kind of its purpose, so that you guys have a good understanding of what we're going to be doing. So primarily, the podcast isn't going to be for explaining in full detail how to train your dog to sit or how to keep your dog from chewing or anything like that. It's really more along the lines of discussing behavior as a whole and pretty much interesting things revolving around behavior, revolving around animal science, and trying to tie that back into at least dog training or small dogs. So, things like evolutionary biology, stuff like that, any interesting news going on as far as dogs go. Particularly because of the quarantine, you'll probably see, a decent amount of interesting kind of thoughts and ideas going on, especially to keep people and their dogs entertained during this time. So you can tune in if you're interested in learning more about animal training, animal science, kind of the advances in animal training and behavior and things like that. We are also going to add a section to the forum for our Small Dogs Club members, and that's going to give you guys the opportunity to volunteer topics and things that you'd like to hear about more on the podcast. So if you're more interested in the evolutionary background of dogs and, their relationship as far as how closely related they are to wolves, we touch on it lightly in the Dog Savvy Small Dog Training Made Easy, but it's really more kind of complex and interesting, and I like talking about it because I find it interesting. So for Small Dogs Club members, those are the types of things you can suggest for the podcast if you're a member. So we're going to try to keep them, short and sweet and easy to kind of go over quickly and throughout your day. And then if you guys are interested in longer pieces or shorter pieces, you're welcome to give us those comments and let us know. So please feel free to go in the forum section and make your suggestions on things you'd be interested in hearing about. And we can tackle just about all that you want. And we could even do a Q&A session towards the end of these as well, where you can ask your questions in the forum. So with my first discussion here, I just wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about barking, because barking seems to be a universal kind of hated behavior with small breed dogs. And it's an interesting concept too, because depending on the scenario, a lot of people want their dogs to bark. If I have someone trying to break in through my window and I'm in the other room, I want my dog to bark at that person, but then I'm going to go and yell at my dog for barking at something that they see out the window that they think might be an intruder in their brain. So they see a squirrel and the squirrel is going to break in and steal their food. And it's an interesting concept that I like to try to point out to people, because a lot of people they let that glaze over. So they, are frustrated by their dog barking all the time, which is, it's usually based in boredom. But when it comes down to it, we've selectively bred dogs who bark more because we want them to be good watchdogs. So the concept of being angry about our dogs barking at anything that they see moving, it tends to be more of we need to try to work more on helping them cope with that. So instead of barking their heads off at every little thing, it's more about keeping them preoccupied. And then what happens is, if we're keeping them mentally stimulated, your dog is going to bark only at the more unusual things. So I like to use my dogs as an example for this, because my dogs they're a little barky. They're collies. So collies tend to be very vocal and very vocal dogs. So my male dog, this is a fun story, but I want to give a little bit more background. So what I usually talk about this is when clients want to talk about teaching their dog to be a guard dog, or teaching their dog to protect or go after intruders, or whatever this case is. And people tend to not realize that dogs' instincts are very good for this most of the time. Now, some breeds have absolutely no instinct for guarding the house, and some breeds that aren't supposed to have those instincts for guarding the house actually guard the house relatively well, surprisingly. So most of the time the barking is kind of what catches people in the first place. So unless you have a very, very high-pitched bark on your small dog, even though they're smaller, they might be enough to actually intimidate. But so that's the background of that. So when I'm talking about this story, it's usually on the sake of convincing people not to teach their larger dog to go after guests, because when it comes down to it, dogs are going to do what they need to do. So the story is basically this. My dog, when he was a little bit younger, he was still a puppy at this time, maybe 6 or 7 months old. And just absolutely the least guardy dog you've ever seen. He could care less about being aggressive towards people in any way. He was very friendly towards everyone he saw, very excited about anyone he saw, really happy, like the happiest dog you've ever seen. Horrible as far as feeling like he's going to protect you from something, because he just wants to love everybody he sees. But you might assume that a dog like that, or a dog that hasn't had any kind of protective training, or, hasn't had any kind of guard dog training, might just be that cartoon character that you see the person breaking into the house and they, the dog lets them in and cooks them a dinner. It's, comical. But when it comes down to it, even dogs that don't seem like they would be able to step up in that instance tend to do so. So I had him out on leash and I was walking him, and he saw my husband upstairs in the window. So we were in a townhome at the time where you enter at the door on the ground floor, and then above it there was a window with that was on the second floor. So we left the house, and my husband had been downstairs. When we were coming back, my husband was in the window and opened the window, and he called down to him, but my dog Mozzie saw him in the window and went actual guard dog bark and rushed to get into the house, to dash up the stairs and search for what he assumed was an intruder in the house. He never displayed any kind of that type of behavior. He wasn't assuming that the person who was upstairs wasn't a person. He never behaved that way towards a person ever. But when they see a scenario that is out of the usual like that, that's when you get a situation where they are reacting in a way that would potentially protect you. Now, a smaller breed of dog might not necessarily actually be able to put much bark in, or put much bite behind their bark. They can do a decent job on someone's ankles. But when it comes down to it, what we want to be doing in these types of scenarios is focusing less upon the I don't ever want my dog to bark, and more upon the we want to make sure that the only times they're barking are the unusual ones. I want my dog to bark when someone's at the door. I want my dog to bark if someone is trying to climb in my window. But I don't want my dog to bark when someone's walking past on the street, on the sidewalk, like they do every single day. And the way that you're going to do that is by achieving, the proper amount of enrichment to make sure your dog's not bored and just looking for something to do. Looking for something to do barking is usually a completely different type of bark than I'm concerned about this person who is at my house. And, if you've got a new puppy or an older dog, your older dog, you're usually going to have already developed a sense for that difference between the two. So if you have a younger dog, you kind of have to warm up to it and learn it. But with an older dog, you've usually kind of learned how to distinguish between their barks. So when my dogs bark at something out the window, we have gopher tortoises all over the place outside of our house. So our dogs are convinced that they're movable rocks and it's some sort of supernatural phenomenon. And they can't stand them. When they bark at a gopher tortoise, it's entirely different than when they bark because someone has pulled in front of the house. So we're on a gated property. We're not dealing with people driving past our house most of the time unless someone has entered our property. So if they're barking at a car that's here, it's entirely different than when they're barking at a tortoise, or if there's a turkey in the yard. Honestly, they usually don't bark at the turkeys. It's just the tortoises. They really hate the tortoises. But that tone of voice, as weird as it is, they have a very different tone of voice when they're barking at different things. It's interesting, and you can usually learn to distinguish between what it is that they're barking at or whining at and what it is, and even which dog it is as well. So you can usually hear the difference between your dogs, hear the difference between what they're barking at, and by working on that, you can make sure that they are reacting to things properly and you aren't overreacting to things, because you don't want to ever discourage them barking at something like that, because you want them to alert you when something's going on. And you also want that barking as a way to discourage any potential crime in the area. So one of the biggest things I've seen is, burglars are a lot less likely to rob a house that has a dog, because it is going to make it harder for them to stay under the radar as far as other people noticing or the homeowners noticing. So having that dog react to something like that is really important. And a lot of people tend to want to this is a good kind of argument against punishment too, because if I punish a dog for that type of reaction, you have two kind of really bad things happening. And the first one is, when I punish a dog for barking at somebody that they don't know, one, they're less likely to repeat that behavior and less likely to do so when someone is actually breaking into your house. And two, it kind of suppresses the barking behavior but doesn't erase the discomfort. So if I'm trying to teach my dog to be comfortable around strangers that I'm okay with, I don't want to just suppress that barking, because the barking is them saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this situation, I'm uncomfortable with this person. And what tends to happen is it goes from a scenario where the dog is warning someone that they're uncomfortable to a scenario where they suppress that because they're fearful of retaliation, but they're still so uncomfortable that they would react if the person behaves in a way that they don't like. So a great example of this I like to use is if a stranger comes up and comes into your house and your dog usually wants to bark and growl at the stranger, but you've been using a shock collar or you've been smacking them on the nose when they do that. They might not bark and growl at the person, but when the person stoops down to try to pet their head, which is usually something that dogs don't enjoy, they don't like being faced head on like that, they might snap at that person and bite their hand without any warning. So it's what's called a precursor to aggression. Barking and growling is something that lets them communicate to other animals and other people, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this and I don't like this. So when you suppress that, it can be very dangerous in the long run for both you as far as protecting your home. As weird as it is for small breed dogs, it can be a good protection. And then also for the sake of not having your dog bite someone. All right, so that's my little spiel for the day, first little kind of start. So if you guys like that topic, feel free to let me know. If you want to hear more about, some other topics, just toss them out there. I'm kind of fun with talking about anything. I have background in a lot of different areas. We can talk about, the potential for the coronavirus to pass from you to your pet. So as far as dogs go, we haven't had any confirmed cases with dogs. I believe that there were suspected cases, but there wasn't a full confirmation occurring in China. But there was one case where we confirmed that it had passed from a human to a cat. And then there is also the recent case where the Bronx Zoo had 2 tigers confirmed to have it, and I believe 2 lions, which were showing symptoms, but I don't know if they were confirmed. But regardless, it's an interesting conversation between, having that go to your animals and what that could potentially mean for them and what it could mean for spreading from animal to person and person to animal. That's called a zoonotic disease. And there are more zoonotic diseases than just this. So it's kind of a scary scenario, but what it looks like at the time is probably that it's going to be not as easily passed to dogs, potentially passed to cats, but it's not a common occurrence at all. So it has to have a mutation occur for that to happen. So it's going to be extremely rare, which is honestly good on our side of things. And most of the time when you have something pass from human to an animal, it takes a lot of mutation for it to spread from animal back to human again. So it shouldn't be something that you guys really need to worry about. But if it's the kind of thing you want to talk about more, completely, feel free to let us know. Small Dogs Club members can drop that in our forum. So give us any suggestions or anything that I can answer in a specific Q&A. If you want a broad topic to talk about, you're welcome to let me know. If you want to just have your specific question answered, I can also do that as well. And we'll try to keep these short and sweet. So don't forget to sign up for our Small Dogs Club if you'd like additional advice for dog training. You can also take a look at our Dog Savvy Small Dog Training Made Easy training course to help with most of your basic behavioral issues and training your dog from top to bottom, so to speak. It also will be translatable to large breed dogs as well. I know a lot of pet owners are having difficulty in this time because we're dealing with quarantine. They can't take their dog to any training. So if you're in a pinch, you're more than welcome to bring your large breed dog into the party as well. And then if you need any additional help, if you join our Small Dogs Club, we can help you out in the forum with any issues that you're having or any issues you're having with understanding or comparing training for small dogs versus large breed dogs as well. Don't forget that your Small Dogs Club members are also able to go onto our forum to ask specific questions for Q&A and also give us suggestions for topics that you'd like discussed that we'll take into account. Finally, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell as well.